Hello, everyone, and welcome to Hour of History. Hopefully, you are enjoying this wonderful season and not too stressed out by everything that's going on in the world. If you are, it's an excellent time to take a break with Hour of History. This episode is brought to you by Namecheap. Domain names starting at 88 cents. Head over to hourofhistory.com/Namecheap to register your domain name today. It's super easy to search for and register your domain, and if that's not enough, you have privacy protection so you can keep your private data hidden from the public database. Plus, you get 2 months of free private email to manage the new email addresses set up. So if you're looking to register a cool domain or get your website started, go to hourofhistory.com/Namecheap. This episode's a little different. Taking a break from interviews for the week. It is just a little story that I have built from various documents I found in the archive. Starting in January, I will be at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, where I am going to be a fellow doing research and other fun things in Washington, D.C. So starting in January, we will get back to the interviews and we will get back to the regular Hour of History programming. If there's anyone you want to hear on the show or topics, I've had some great suggestions in conversation over the recent weeks, but feel free to drop us a line in the comments at hourofhistory.com, and as I'm scheduling future guests, I will take your suggestions absolutely into consideration. Thanks for subscribing, thanks for listening, and have a great and happy new year. On Hour of History, it's our world, anytime, any place.
This is the Hour of History podcast. Our world, anytime, any place. And now from the Hour of History studio in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, your Hour of History starts right now.
Although the 1920s are nearly 100 years ago, and it seems like a distant time, most of the film black and white and most of the audio hardly recoverable, the 1920s weren't too different from our own time. This story I'm about to tell you is about one family whose life changed profoundly through the 1920s, 1930s, and 1940s. They would never have imagined where they ended up, but much of life takes us on paths that we don't intend and we don't imagine before they happen. This is the story of Richard Schönberg, and it takes place in Bohemia, an area of what is now Czech Republic. Schönberg was just like anyone at the time who would work during the week, have weekends, time to go out to the park. In this case, Schönberg was watching a toddler play in the grass, a family friend, looking at a fallen leaf, inspecting just the change of seasons, the crunchy brown leaves of the Bohemian fall. Richard was a single man and wasn't afraid to approach a nearby woman of the same age who was sitting on the bench, passing time in the park. And immediately they had a connection. They spoke freely, they laughed. Richard joked about nothing in particular, and they created a friendship that eventually turned, continued, and developed it into something more. From warm conversation, they talked about tragedy. It quickly turned to tales of a war that was not too long ago, World War I. The woman, named Kate, had lost her fiancé in the war. Richard, though a survivor, too knew about quite a few people who had died, who had never returned. Somehow he made it back alive. He had served in the German army and was a survivor of a French prison camp, a place he lived for multiple years. It was actually his fortune that he had been put into the prison camp rather than simply killed in one of the many battles that cost millions of lives during World War I. Often he wouldn't even talk about these moments, and he wouldn't let the past resurface. The long nights in the French prison, providing manual labor for the enemy army in exchange for a meager ration of rice and potatoes, was a source of pride for him that he had survived, but not something he would bring up in common conversation, but when he sat and talked to Kate, such conversation was exactly what they had. Eventually, Kate would learn about the Iron Cross he had earned for his patriotism and for his service to the German army, the one that was ultimately unsuccessful in winning World War I. He saved the letter that he got that had certified him as a recipient of the reward, one that would come in handy later in the 1930s. Kate and Richard continued their family, decided to start one together, and incorporate their family lives to join and create a business, a department store, a place where anyone of the area might find provisions for the mundane activities of daily life. Richard sold clothes, goods, things that might be in a closet or an apartment of anyone in the area. His business was well known and popular, and somehow it survived the hyperinflation crisis and the economic collapse that brought the Weimar Republic, the post-German world, to its knees in the 1920s. The stability of the department store was extraordinary, and the sense of humor Richard kept through the darkest days in the French prison kept Kate around and led them to start a new family. From their marriage came 3 children in what they remember as the happiest time of their life. They were able to survive when many didn't have much. They did their tithing, but they continued mostly working day in, day out at the department store. Richard's family, his mother, who the children called Oma, lived around the corner, laughed with friends, and often worked with employees. They shared many days working, many smiles, many hard times, good times, busy days turned into joyful nights, and the family often gathered around a candle-lit table in the dining room and shared jokes and stories long into the evening on the weekends. For vacation, the family would take Richard's car and drive through the Czech countryside, a luxury that few were able to afford in the 1920s. They could go for hikes and picnics in the foothills. The boys grew quickly, and Richard enjoyed the few days off away from the department store. On a few occasions, they even went as far as the North Sea, playing in the sea, creating memories that Richard and Kate would not soon forget. As the children continued to grow, they developed a great relationship with their grandparents. The children would take long walks with the grandfather, Opa. They would start at the family home and walk around the city, sometimes ending at the synagogue, a small place in which the grandfather was the caretaker. The laughter-filled walks with his grandfather, although they were only early childhood memories, took special hold in the child's imagination. For the children, it was a chance to learn about the world with their grandfather. They would learn about the trees, the flowers, the birds, and the books, the ancient books that his grandfather knew so well. Synagogue wasn't something that they went to regularly, for the parents were busy at the department store, but it was something that the grandparents kept near and dear to their hearts. In the way traits leap from generation to generation, religion was something that the grandfather and the grandchildren seemed to share at a profound level. Sometimes the shining light would go through the Torahs stained onto the glass, a magnificent sight for a young child that made the stories of Opa and Oma come to life. The boys were extremely fortunate, all things considered, with a loving family, prosperity in a time of widespread need. Yet, as they transitioned from adolescence to young adulthood, the previously submerged undercurrents in German society, growing nativism, expansionism, grew into waves of rage, propelled by hateful rhetoric of the Nationalist Socialist Nazi Party. The children went to German public schools where the teachers who once saluted the red, gold, and black flag of the Weimar Republic now expressed relief at raising their arms in the Roman salute to the new Führer and the black swastika of the Third Reich. Teachers, allegedly worldly guides and protectors of innocent, turned into drill masters and persecutors of the helpless. The children were ridiculed for their Jewish heritage, and child friendships that once occupied the seconds, minutes, hours, and days of life suddenly turned to harmful animosities that challenged the children to consider what was wrong with themselves, what was wrong with their family, when, as recently as the previous few years, nothing had been wrong. In 1938, Kristallnacht, the Night of the Broken Glass, did not turn out well for the family. The Schönberg house, the setting of so many good memories and happy times, was destroyed. Rocks flew through the windows, hurled by angry neighbors. Doors were beaten down, belongings were taken and destroyed by an angry mob of people who once were customers of the Schönberg department store. People who exchanged money for goods with a member of their community now grabbed Richard from his home. They beat him and they sent him away. He was given a one-way direct ticket to Buchenwald concentration camp. Separated from his life, his children, his parents, and his wife, Richard's mind flashed back to his years captive in France. Rude memories awoken, the sick reality that now his compatriot captors turned on him. It made his soul ache beyond even the tremendous pain of missing his family. With no possessions and long nights standing, waiting outside, exposed to roll calls and the elements consumed Richard. He lost weight and his spirit was greatly battered. The letter of merit he had signed that showed that he had won an Iron Cross in the First World War saved Richard's life. It was a rare sign of mercy from a political regime that did not typically show mercy, and it was the only chance Richard had to take his family to escape. He was told never to return to the same country, now part of Germany, that he had offered his life for just mere decades earlier. He was only given $3, and he and his family did not look back. Through arrangements, through friendships, and through connections, Richard was able to procure a ship out of Germany in hope of finding new life. In this strange mixture of anticipation and fear, relief and sadness for those who were left behind, just like his parents, Oma and Opa, he was ready to leave. The ship stopped twice. It left Hamburg and stopped in Liverpool and Lisbon. For the family, the children were told they were just going on vacation, and Lisbon was a chance for them to explore a new city very different from the Czech countryside in which they grew up. They were no longer in Bohemia, and seeing a foreign land was something extraordinary to the boys. They looked at ancient castles, cobblestone streets, unfamiliar faces. They were on an adventure, something positive and unforgettable in their lives, yet they knew something was wrong that Oma and Opa had not come along. One of the children passed the time reading his favorite book, a translated German edition of the now American classic Gone with the Wind. Deep within the pages of the ambitious book, a long one for a young child, there was a story of resilience and an idea of rebuilding after disaster. Such themes connected on a profound level, a time of uncertainty where some people talked as if the world was coming to an end. After a long voyage, the ship made port in Havana, where the Schönbergs disembarked. They were fortunate Cuba's doors were still open, not yet shut. In the following weeks, they would hear of another vessel in Havana harbor, the MS St. Louis, and its over 900 Jewish passengers that were rejected and sent back to certain doom in Europe. For the Schönbergs, life was not easy in Cuba, but it was life. It was a totally different place from the Czech countryside. Richard was persistent in his efforts, and despite being on a tourist visa that didn't allow him to work, he hung around fruit stands with 2 empty buckets and collected orange peels left by Cuban vendors who provided American consumers with a delicious peeled orange. Richard would take the buckets of the peels home, a home they rented with help from extended family in the United States. There at the home, Kate would take the peels, she would boil them with sugar and add soda water. After hours of production, Richard would take his sons and go door to door through the hot streets of Havana and sell orange soda to habaneros and Yankees. The generous aid from the family in America and the small allowance they made by selling orange soda was all they had for sustenance now that the department store was no longer in their control. The children started to embrace every aspect of habanero culture, taking to the streets of Havana, attempting to read this new foreign language, Spanish, communicating only in German, but mixing with the Cuban children on the street, they learned Spanish quickly. It wasn't long until they had a Spanish copy of Gone with the Wind, another one to practice the language, slowly reading page by page at a time when the most advanced technology was only radio. Havana was home to hundreds of refugee Jews who formed a community and met regularly for worship, beer, and companionship, and it was often at the Schönberg house because they had an extra room. It became a center of a spiritual community, an important cultural center for people from a wide variety of backgrounds that hadn't walked the same walks of life just recently in Europe. Here, the children would start to learn. They would recite from the Torah in German, the language of their family's heritage and community, yet Spanish was all around them, and German seemed to be a language that had rejected them. Still, the community, the memories, the change of place made long days pass quickly in Havana. It was a strange twist, a different kind of abundance that helped them to survive. In times of uncertainty, looking at the papers, trying to be with the German community, trying to be with the new American community. For the Schönbergs, they were fortunate. Richard's uncle had a business in Virginia. It was enough for the Schönbergs to secure a guarantee, an affidavit, and a visa under the United States immigrant quota system. It was difficult or impossible for other refugees to accomplish, people who didn't have connections in the United States. Who would sign for them? Who would be responsible for them? Would they be allowed under the German quota into the United States? As the political situation tensed, it seemed more difficult for these people to reach such conclusions. Getting to Cuba was only a short boat ride away. It was crowded with American tourists who continued to use Cuba late into the afternoon. From the boat, they made it to Miami and eventually traveled up through this big foreign American land to Richmond. It didn't take long for the family to adapt to their new life in Virginia. The name was changed Schönberg to Belmont, and the boys enrolled in the local high school named after George Washington. After years of hard work and a loan secured from a local bank, Richard and Kate were again able to open a family shop on the main street in a small town. They had moved outside Richmond in search of a similar small village to the Czech area they had grown up in Bohemia. The small town proved to be welcoming to them. For most, they looked and acted just like any American immigrant family might. Richard and Kate still had a thick accent, but the children adapted quickly and spoke almost immediately just like Americans. In 1941, the children were taken to see Gone with the Wind, a movie that had become a hit in 1939 in the theaters. Their mother, Kate, knew the movie was long, so she had packed sandwiches. The liverwurst on pumpernickel bread drew attention from American friends, but after years of instability, it was remarkable that this was one of the only differences that kept them separated from being seen as totally American. The oldest of the boys were able to serve in the army for the United States in World War II. Their German was an asset to the U.S. military forces, and 2 of the 3 boys went to Europe. They fought in reverse, almost mirroring the opposite of the steps that their father had taken only 20 years earlier. They served with distinction, and although they had begrudgingly been accepted to America only under a German immigrant quota, they proved valuable and important to the United States military in its victory in World War II. When they returned, they had the chance under the GI Bill to attend American universities, and all 3 children had successful careers. Richard and Kate continued working at this small business on Main Street until 1970, when they died on the afternoon of their grandchild's bar mitzvah. They continued to live, the children, in Virginia, but they never forgot where they came from. The sights, the sounds, the feelings, the emotions their parents had felt in the 1920s and 1930s were preserved in collections of letters, photographs, and stories. Oma and Opa never made it out of Germany. Assured that they, as elders, were going to be treated with dignity, and unable and unwilling to leave the country in which they were born and raised, in which their children had fought, the grandparents stayed as long as they were allowed. Richard's father, the man who had shared so much of his joy and history with his grandchildren, suffered from a soul as broken as the glass of the Schönberg house on Kristallnacht. The synagogue that was the center of his life and earthly experience was destroyed by people whom with he had once shared happiness, sadness, hopes, dreams, disappointments. Had their children not gone to fight for Germany for World War I? Did they not all live together during the challenges of the post-war period and the disappointments of the failed Weimar Republic? How had neighbors, customers, and acquaintances discarded their shared humanity and instead chosen the path of hate and fear? To many, the Belmonts in America might just seem like another family, but the scars of the past and the knowledge of people turning on them within 1 decade stayed forever. As the Belmont children each had children and the family grew, the past was never discarded or abandoned. Both lived through their religion and their family stories. The Belmonts continue to share tales of Oma and Opa, who had died in concentration camps, separated from each other, separated from their children, and separated from their grandchildren. A harsh reminder that at any time, things can change. Although they were lucky and had made it to Cuba and the United States before other families had, there was much and many people who had been left behind, unable to make the same journey, unable to save themselves, unable to make connections with families who would bring them. And it serves as an important reminder. While their survival is an inspiration and their story continues to remind us to look to the past, this story shows us both the possibilities of open doors and open hearts and the harsh reality of closed minds and tall walls. This is the story of the Belmonts from Bohemia.
Thanks again for listening. Make sure to check out hourofhistory.com/Rex for all the recommendations mentioned during the show. That's hourofhistory.com/RECS. And if you still haven't gotten your fill of the Hour of History, be sure to head over to our blog at hourofhistory.com/blog, where you'll find topics that were covered in the podcast as well as others. And that concludes this week's episode. We thank you again for listening, and we hope to have you back here next week at the Hour of History podcast.